The mud of Crestfall, Colorado, had a particular character in the spring of 1884. It was not the simple liquid mud of a lesser country, but a thick, greedy clay that clung to wagon wheels and boot heels with the tenacity of a lonely child. It smelled of pine and wet earth and the cold memory of snow. For Clara Holt, it was the smell of her first year alone. The ranch, her father's legacy, spread out under a vast, indifferent sky, its fences marking the boundaries of her world, its silence a constant companion. She was 27, a fact that felt both impossibly old and not nearly old enough. A year had passed since she had buried her father on the low hill overlooking the creek, and in that year, the solitude had settled into her bones like the winter cold. It was a dual grief she carried, a wound with two distinct edges. The first was the raw, clean cut of her father's absence, a loss as immense and empty as the plains. The second was older, a ragged tear from a year before that, when the man who had promised her a lifetime had walked away for another woman, taking with him a future she had allowed herself to believe in. That wound had festered, leaving behind a hard, protective scar. Trust, she had decided, was a currency she no longer traded in. Clara learned to run the ranch not with joy, but with a fierce, quiet competence. She knew the language of cattle, the moods of the weather, the precise tension of a well-strung barbed wire fence. Her hands, once soft, were now calloused and capable. They could mend a harness, deliver a calf, and keep a ledger with a steady, unforgiving script. She was the capable anchor, holding fast in a sea of her own making. The resilience was there, but it was a lonely strength, born of necessity and shadowed by a sorrow she never spoke aloud. Then Silas Croft had arrived, a ghost from her father's past, smelling of cheap whiskey and entitlement. He had been her father's partner, long ago, before a falling out she only vaguely remembered. Now he stood on her porch, his hat in his hands but his eyes full of avarice, claiming a verbal agreement from a decade past gave him rights to half her land, half her herd, half of everything she had left. The claim was a phantom, a whisper against the solid fact of the deed in her father's lockbox, but in a territory where a man's word could still carry the weight of law, it was a threat she could not ignore. The town council, mediating, had agreed the first step was a proper survey to establish the exact lines of the property as they stood. That was how Nathaniel Graves came to Crestfall. He arrived not on a tired ranch horse, but with the tools of his trade packed in sturdy leather cases, a transit, a gunter's chain, and stacks of crisp, clean paper. He was a surveyor, a man who dealt in facts, in angles and elevations, and the indisputable truth of a boundary marker. He was introduced to her by the mayor, a quiet, steady man with eyes the color of a winter sky. He did not offer condolences or ask about her troubles. He simply shook her hand, his grip firm and dry. "Miss Holt," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to carry no unnecessary inflection. He was honorable, reliable, a man of his profession. He looked at the world as a series of lines to be measured and recorded, and at first, she was just another line on his map. Their initial arrangement was purely professional. He would use the old line shack near the southern pasture as his base of operations while he worked. Clara agreed, her tone clipped and businesslike. She showed him the shack, a small, sturdy structure her father had built for lambing season. It was clean, with a cot, a small stove, and a table. "This will be more than adequate," Nathaniel said, setting his things down. He did not look at her as he spoke, his attention already on the landscape outside the single window, his mind already calculating distances and plotting trajectories. He was a man content in his work, but she could see a solitude in him that mirrored her own, a quietness that was not empty, but contained. The first few days established a rhythm. She would see him in the distance, a solitary figure against the vastness of the land, moving with a deliberate, unhurried pace. He would set up his transit, his body a study in concentration as he peered through the eyepiece, making a note in his logbook. He worked from sunup until the light failed, a methodical progress she could track by the small, brightly colored flags he planted in the earth. They were alien objects in the familiar landscape, stark and temporary. They rarely spoke. Sometimes their paths would cross as she rode out to check on a section of the herd, and he was moving between survey points. He would nod. "Miss Holt." She would nod back. "Mr. Graves." A pause would hang between them, filled only by the wind and the distant lowing of cattle. She kept her eyes on the horizon. He kept his on his work. It was a shared quiet, born of awkwardness and a mutual respect for the task at hand. She watched him from her porch in the evenings, a dark shape moving inside the lamplit square of the lined shack window. She saw the way he cared for his horse, the gentle way he checked its hooves, the soft words he spoke to it that were carried away by the breeze. She saw the way a man was when he thought no one was watching. He learned about her in the same way, through observation. He saw her ride out at dawn, straight-backed and determined. He saw her wrestling a new fence post into the ground, her jaw set with effort. He saw her one afternoon, sitting on the porch steps, her mending forgotten in her lap, her gaze fixed on her father's grave on the hill. He saw the strength, and he saw the sorrow it was built to contain. He felt the unspoken history of the place, the weight of her loss, the echo of the betrayal she never mentioned. One evening, a cold rain swept in from the mountains, turning the dust to a slick, greasy mud. Nathaniel worked through it, unwilling to lose the day. He returned to the shack well after dark, soaked through and chilled to the bone. As he fumbled with the latch, his cold, numbed fingers clumsy, he saw it. A covered plate sat on the small crate next to the door, a thick wool blanket folded beside it. He lifted the cover. It was beef stew, still warm, with 2 thick slices of her bread. There was no note. None was needed. It was an act of kindness, simple and direct, but it felt like more. It felt like a crack of light in a long-closed room. He ate the stew standing by the stove, the warmth spreading through him more than just the heat of the food. It was the first gesture of care she had offered, and it landed with the quiet weight of a stone in a still pond. He did not mention it the next day. To do so would have been to make it a transaction, something requiring thanks and acknowledgement, and he understood, instinctively, that this was not what it was. It was a communication in a language they were both beginning to learn, a language of quiet actions. A few days later, he was surveying the fence line along the creek at the northern edge of her property. He noticed the gate to the water gap was sagging, one of its heavy iron hinges cracked almost through. It would not last another season. It was a small thing, but it was the kind of small thing that could become a big problem, letting half a herd wander into the next county. That afternoon, instead of returning to his survey, he rode into Crestfall. He went to the blacksmith, paid for a new hinge from his own pocket, and returned to the ranch. It took him the better part of an hour, working with tools from his own saddlebag, to remove the old hinge and set the new one, making sure the gate swung true and latched securely. He was finishing when she rode up. She stopped her horse a dozen yards away, watching him tighten the last bolt. She did not say anything for a long moment. He wiped his hands on a cloth, his face unreadable. "The blacksmith in town would have charged you for that," she said, her voice even. "I expect he would have," Nathaniel replied, not looking at her, his attention on the solid fit of the gate. "It was not your responsibility. A broken gate is a problem waiting to happen," he said simply. He finally turned to face her. "I was here. I had the tools." She held his gaze. The wall she kept around herself was still there, but he thought he could see a faint line in it now, a place where the mortar was not quite so thick. She gave a short, single nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that held more weight than a paragraph of thanks. She had seen the gesture, and she had understood it. It was not a grand romantic overture. It was practical. It was solid. It was something a man did when he saw a need and filled it, without expectation of reward. It was the way he was. His work took him to the county seat in Teller to examine the official records. He spent 2 days in the dusty, quiet archives, poring over old plat maps and deeds, tracing the history of the Holt Ranch back through the years. The clerk, a man named Henderson, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on his nose, was a font of local history. He was also, it turned out, the town's foremost observer. "That Holt Ranch," Henderson said, leaning on the counter as Nathaniel rolled up a map. "Tragedy. What happened to old John? And his girl, Clara. She's a strong one. Had to be, after that business with the fella from Denver." Nathaniel kept his expression neutral, his hands busy. "I'm just here for the survey." Henderson chuckled, a dry rustling sound. "Are you? Town looks out for her, you know. We were glad when we heard you were the one doing the survey. An honest man. She needs an honest man on her side." He paused, his gaze sharp. "Silas Croft is a snake. Always has been. John Holt paid him out for his share of the partnership in '72. I remember it myself. Croft took the money and went to try his luck in the mining camps. Came back with nothing but dust in his pockets." Nathaniel stopped what he was doing. "He was paid out?" "Cash money," Henderson confirmed. "There was paperwork, but it was a private contract. Never filed with the county. John trusted him to be gone for good." The information settled in Nathaniel's mind. A private contract. It meant Croft's claim was likely fraudulent, but proving it would be another matter. He thanked Henderson and went back to the ledgers, his focus sharpened. He was not just looking for boundaries now. He was looking for a ghost. He found it on the second day, tucked away in a misfiled folio of water rights claims. It was a deed of dissolution, dated June 1872. It clearly stated that the partnership between John Holt and Silas Croft was terminated, and that Croft, in consideration of a payment of $500, relinquished all present and future claims on the Holt Ranch and its assets. It was signed by both men, witnessed by the then sheriff, and notarized. It was ironclad. It was the document that would save Clara's home. He held the paper in his hands, a wave of profound relief washing over him. And then, immediately following it, came a cold dread. His job was to survey the land. His report was supposed to be an impartial, technical document about metes and bounds, not a legal opinion on the validity of a claim. To produce this document would be to step far outside the bounds of his professional duty. It would be an admission that he had not been impartial, that he had been actively searching for a way to defeat Silas Croft. It would be an admission that his interest in the case of Clara Holt was no longer professional. It was personal. The internal awakening was no longer a gentle stirring. It was a loud, insistent clamor. He thought of her face, the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she stood her ground on her own land. He thought of the stew she had left for him, a simple kindness that had felt like a lifeline. He thought of the way he had started to think of the ranch, not as a plot of land on a map, but as her ranch, her home. He wanted a certain outcome. He wanted her to be safe. He wanted her to be free of the shadow of men like Croft and the memory of men who had failed her. He wanted to be the kind of man who did not fail her. In that dusty archive room, with the proof of her salvation in his hands, Nathaniel Graves understood he had crossed a line more significant than any he had ever surveyed. He could no longer be her surveyor. He rode back to Crestfall that evening, the document tucked safely in an oilskin pouch inside his coat. He did not go to the line shack. He rode directly to her house. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and soft rose. Light spilled from her windows onto the porch. He could see her silhouette moving inside. He waited. He was not going to be the one to rush this. After a few minutes, the front door opened, and she stepped out onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling air. She saw him sitting on his horse in the yard, and she did not look surprised. It was as if she had been expecting him. He dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked to the bottom of the porch steps. He held her gaze, the space between them charged with everything that had gone unsaid for weeks. "I am finished with the survey," he began, his voice quiet but clear in the twilight. "So soon?" "Yes," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out the oilskin pouch. He did not climb the steps. He held it out to her. "I found this in the county records office in Teller." She came to the edge of the porch and took the pouch from him. Her fingers brushed his, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. She opened it and pulled out the folded document. She read it by the fading light, her expression unreadable. She read it once, and then a second time, her lips moving silently over the words. When she finally looked up, her eyes were shining. It means his claim is fraudulent," Nathaniel finished for her. "It means he has no right to this land. It means you are safe." A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. She did not wipe it away. "You will include this in your report to the council." It was a statement, not a question. He shook his head, the movement small but definite. "No." She frowned, a line of confusion appearing between her brows. "But why not?" "This proves it. This ends it." "I cannot submit this," he said, and the words cost him more than she could know. "As of this afternoon, I am no longer the surveyor on this case. I have recused myself." "Recused yourself?" Her voice was a whisper. "But this is your job, your reputation." "My job was to measure the land, Miss Holt," he said, finally looking her directly in the eye, holding nothing back. "It was not my job to hope for a certain outcome. It was not my job to search for evidence to protect one party. I am no longer an impartial observer." He let the words hang in the air, a plain-spoken declaration of everything he felt. He had chosen her. He had chosen her over the strict, unbending code that had defined his life and his work. He had laid his professional integrity at her feet, and he could only wait to see what she would do. Clara looked from the paper in her hand to the man standing before her. She saw the cost of his decision in the steady set of his shoulders, in the earnest gravity of his expression. He had not come with flowery speeches or grand promises. He had come with proof. Not just proof of Silas Croft's lie, but proof of his own character. He had seen a need, a great and terrible one, and he had filled it, at great personal expense, without any certainty of her response. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, and because he cared for her more than he cared for his own standing. It was the one thing she had believed no man would ever give her. An act of selfless honesty, a choice, made freely, that put her first. The hard protective scar tissue around her heart, the wall she had so carefully built and maintained, did not just crack. It dissolved. It washed away in the face of this quiet, solid man and his undeniable truth. A slow smile touched her lips, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached her eyes and made them shine brighter than the tears. "I see," she said softly. She was not going to be the one to say any of this first. But he had. "You got there," she said, her voice full of a gentle, humorous warmth. "It took you long enough." Relief, profound and absolute, washed over Nathaniel's face. He had not known what he was hoping for, but this was more than he could have imagined. "I have been told," he admitted, a small smile of his own appearing, "that I can be a little slow." "A little," she agreed. She folded the document carefully and tucked it back into the pouch. She did not offer it back to him. It was hers now, a gift. "Mr. Graves," she said, her tone shifting from gentle humor to a quiet invitation. "I was just about to have supper. I find I've made too much. Would you care to join me?" "I would like that very much, Miss Holt," he said. I would like that more than you know." "Clara," she corrected him softly. "My name is Clara." "Clara," he repeated, and her name on his lips sounded like a promise. He walked up the steps, and for the first time, he crossed the threshold of her home. The courtship that followed was as quiet and steady as the man himself. With the legal threat from Silas, Croft dispatched quickly and quietly by Clara's lawyer, armed with the undeniable proof Nathaniel had given her, a new season began on the ranch. Nathaniel finished his final report on the survey, a simple, factual document with no mention of the controversy, and submitted it to a different official in a neighboring county, fulfilling his contract but formally noting his recusal from any further involvement in the Crestfall dispute. His reputation took a small hit. There were whispers of impropriety. He did not care. He stayed. He took a room at the boarding house in town, but most of his days were spent at her ranch. He did not work for her, he worked with her. They mended fences together, their hands often brushing as they passed tools back and forth. They rode out with the herd, moving as a practiced team. He was a quick study, his methodical mind perfectly suited to the logic of ranching. In the evenings they sat on her porch, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in a comfortable silence that had evolved from their first awkward encounters. He spoke of the places he had been, the vast, empty territories he had mapped, and the loneliness of a life lived in transit. She spoke of her father, of her love for the land, and finally, haltingly, of the wound that she was only now realizing had begun to heal. They were married in the autumn, as the aspen leaves turned to brilliant gold on the mountainsides. The ceremony was held not in the church, but on the low hill overlooking the creek next to her father's grave. It was a simple affair. The minister came out from town, and a handful of neighbors stood as witnesses. Clara wore a simple cream-colored dress she had made herself, and in her hair she wore a sprig of wild aster Nathaniel had picked for her that morning. He stood beside her, solid and sure, his hand holding hers. They spoke their vows as the wind whispered through the tall grass, their promises not of grand passion, but of steadfast companionship, of shared burdens and quiet joys. It was a union not just of two people, but of two solitudes forged into something new and whole. The town, their Greek chorus, looked on and approved. It felt right. It felt settled. 5 years passed. The ranch thrived. The Holt name, now the Graves name, was synonymous with integrity and hard work. The house, once so quiet, was now filled with the sounds of life. One summer evening, they sat on the porch, just as they had so many times before. The air was warm, scented with clover and dust. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, tired and content. He had just returned from a 2-week surveying job for the railroad, a concession to the part of him that still loved the precision of the work, but his trips were shorter now, his focus always on the journey home. Clara sat beside him, mending a tear in a small pair of denim trousers. A 4-year-old boy with his father's steady winter sky eyes and a shock of his mother's dark hair slept soundly in a small cot just inside the open door. In the yard, their 2-year-old daughter, a determined little thing with Clara's stubborn chin, chased fireflies in the deepening twilight. Nathaniel watched his daughter, a small smile playing on his lips. She's going to try and catch them all. She will too, Clara said without looking up from her mending. She does not give up on a thing once she's set her mind to it. A comfortable silence fell between them. It was the language they knew best. He reached over and took her free hand, his thumb tracing patterns over her calloused knuckles. "I was looking at the new maps for the Northern Territory today," he said. "Vast country up there. Still so much of it unmeasured." Clara threaded her needle with a practiced motion. "Still drawing lines?" she asked, a familiar, gentle tease in her voice. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Only the ones," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers across the twilight, "that lead back here." She smiled, a deep, settled smile that held all the history of their years together. It held the memory of a broken hinge, a plate of stew, and a folded document passed between them on a dusty evening. It held the proof of a trust that had been earned, not given, and the quiet, unshakable foundation of the life they had built. That is the thing about trust. It is not always a leap of faith. Sometimes it is not a leap at all. Sometimes it is a slow and patient construction, built piece by piece, like a stone wall. It is built with small acts of kindness, with unspoken gestures of care. It is built with the steady presence of someone who sees a need and fills it, who notices a weakness and makes it strong. It is proven not with poetry or promises, but with a single, costly choice. The choice to put another's well-being ahead of one's own. For a heart that is afraid, that is the only language it can truly understand. It is the only reason that matters.